the Grey Hat Beard podcast. And welcome back to part 2 of the Grey Hat Beard podcast, show 7 we're at now, which is lucky for some. Lucky for Gary, we've just had a little break, so he's managed to get a bit of food to keep him going through the discussion now. And we're going to go into chatting about Power Platform and governance. So we know many people are jumping at Power Platform. Al, I know we're seeing a lot of uptick from that. People, whether it's PowerApps, whether it's Power Automate, not so much Power Virtual Agent yet, but I think a great tool if people can afford it. Very worthwhile. But we're going to kick off in 3 parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about why governance, because I think many people see that as a draconian term and feel a bit put off by it. Al's then going to go into a bit more of a specific story about Power Platform and governance and some of the good things that are around with that. And then, Gary, I think you're going to talk about the ALM, the application, and I should remember what L stands for.
Life cycle.
Life cycle management. So for those who didn't know that, like myself, or forgot it suddenly in the middle, it goes my appraisal. If you suddenly forgot that in the middle there, Gary will talk a bit about that world and the more developer centric. But I'm going to kick off just talking about why governance, because to a lot of people, especially if you've come from the SharePoint world, governance was often about trying to make sure that technically things work, that you didn't fill up all your storage. You know, you're always fighting for SQL Server space, and if you were a SharePoint admin there, and that was so much about it, as much as anything else, making sure you didn't hit 5,000 item limits in lists, and very much driven by the technical side. You'd look at the limits and the boundaries, the things you absolutely couldn't go over, as well as the things that it was recommended for performance reasons that you shouldn't go over. And if you look at Power Platform, there's certainly fewer limits in that. There's a lot more you can do, but that's not a good reason not to do governance. This still is, and to me, one of the key principles is to make sure that things are easy to use. And being able to find your content, whether it's a flow within Power Automate, you want to find your flow within there, whether it's getting access to the right Power Apps, knowing which Power Apps are available. It's that understanding of what's available is such an important thing. So putting that governance in, which may be naming conventions, maybe different things. I'm not going to jump over into Al's side so much. The importance is to make things easy for people to use, to make sure those apps are available on there. And as you're doing that, make it clear why that governance is in place, not just telling people you must have this naming convention and then expecting them to just adhere to it for the sake of it. Trying to be clear why, and as public as way as possible, why that naming convention is there, how that can be used to help people find the applications, how that can be used to set permissions and understand who the audience is, that sort of thing. Making it as easy for people as possible and for them to understand why. Because if people know why that governance is in place, they're far more likely to actually adhere to it and see the point of it. So making those things easy to do, making it clear why people to do that, and also make sure it's maintainable. So make sure that whatever governance you put in place, if you come up with this huge, elaborate 100-page document about all the things you should do, if there's no way to enforce that, you're not going to get people doing it. You're not going to see the benefits of it. So making sure whatever you do, that you have some kind of platform or way of monitoring and keeping an eye on that. So putting in place ideas, but also make sure that you can track those down. And if people aren't doing it, then you can do something about that. And that may be stopping people. It may be opening up a discussion and going and speaking to those people that may be breaching that, understanding why and helping them to do things the right way. Help people fall into the right buckets so they try and do the right thing the right way. But if they aren't, then go and speak, understand why, and either maybe change that governance because there is a good reason, or help work with them to put in place the right way of doing things. So I think that's really important.
It is, and I think the concept of governance is even more important for the Power Platform than it is for SharePoint, actually, because the Power Platform, it's pitched at so many different audiences. It's pitched at citizen developers who can, improve their personal productivity, their team productivity. And then there are also enterprise solutions being built on it. So you've got so many different audiences that need to play nicely in the same area, that it's massively important that you've got that governance in place at the outset. Ironically, most of that governance hasn't been there from the outset. So therefore, a lot of what we're doing now is looking at the tools that are now available and saying, well, actually, how can we retrospectively take control of these environments that have actually been set up? And depending on,
and I think that's something people have gone through from the SharePoint and other worlds of going through that. And I know that was a big concern when the Power Platform first came out, that there was nothing in place.
I think that because you can come at the Power Platform from multiple directions, you can come at it from a dynamics direction where there's already, a good culture of governance. There's already a good culture of discipline because it is enterprise line of business applications. But then you can now come at it from SharePoint and go, I can just click that little button that says build a Power App on this SharePoint list. And all of a sudden I have a new Power App. I can press that. It's now automate, isn't it? They've changed it over this week to say
did change it,
press that little button,
I think.
On a list in SharePoint and go automate, and I can put a flow in around a particular list. All of that comes under the citizen developer side of it, because that's all. I don't need IT there. I can do that as a user with my own licensing. So being able to actually control that and go, actually, do we need to know when somebody has done that? Do we need to know whether that Power App is being used, whether that flow is actually automated, something that's really essential and it's being used day in, day out? Do we need to know when it fails? Do we need to know
when someone leaves? Can you still access those hugely important activities?
Yeah. Is it going to stop working when that user's account is disabled? Are there errors with it? Is it running successfully, or is it just in the background failing every day? All of these questions are things that, from an IT perspective, you kind of need to know. It's made more complicated when you do look at the different Power Platform environments that you can have. So you can actually create specific environments that have, they are containers for applications where you can deploy your application. So if you have a dev, test, and prod environments, you can actually build those as Power Platform environments, PowerApps environments.
Just for those who may not be sure, what is a Power Platform environment? I mean, you kind of covered it on it a bit there, but
so a PowerApps environment is a container, so it can have a CDS, essentially database in it. You can configure data loss prevention policies around it. You can configure the security roles in it, who has access to it. So you can really tie down and say, actually, this is segmented away from the rest of the organization. It's not part of that big playpen that all of the citizen developers use. It's much more targeted, so you can put much more control around it. So understanding.
How do you see people using that? Because I've seen a lot with dev, test, production environments, but you've touched on there of having one, as you say, a play pit where anyone effectively can go and create, but then also another area where there's almost the formal business apps sit as well.
And that's exactly it. It's formal business apps. It's apps that need to be more managed, that are more critical to the business. They need to be essentially promoted into a location where they are monitored more closely. Certainly things like common data service, those are areas where you might be bringing data in from other applications and you want to actually have a gateway to an on-premises location. You would put that into an environment. So if you need to test it, you would have your dev, your test environments where you can develop those sorts of integrations. You don't necessarily want common data service in your play pits. It needs additional licensing for one. You don't necessarily want to have data gateways to say, let me access my on-prem SQL. And you may want different data loss prevention policies that mean that maybe I can integrate with external sources from a particular environment, but not from my general citizen development environment. So all of those.
I was going to say, how does that work for the end user? So does that mean if the end user has their kind of playpen and the formal business apps, do they need to change between those environments to get to the different apps?
So if they are given maker permissions, they can change between those environments, and they can actually then say, right, so I'm going to work in my my finance environment, because I'm working with finance data. So I can put PowerApps in there. I can create flows in there that specifically have access to that data.
But what about for getting list of apps and things? Would that not for the creator, but for consumers of those apps?
So it would be published to them. So they wouldn't see any difference. They would see those apps published to them. It doesn't really matter where they are. They will still see them as apps showing up in the PowerApps interface for them. So it raises lots of questions, having all of those different options in terms of how you track and manage that and the usage of those. So this is where the Center of Excellence comes in, and this is a Microsoft project. It's on GitHub, but it has essentially 3 components. The first one is the core components, and what that does is it uses Flow to consolidate data from the audit logs, from PowerApps in terms of when things are being created, when they're being run, and it brings it all into a common data service repository that allows us then to actually analyze the information and to say, well, we can see who are the main makers, who's making the most PowerApps, the most flows, how often are they all being used, how many environments are there, how much usage is there in each of those environments, and also things like which connectors are being used, are there external connectors being used, and so we can start to see all of that information come through in the core components. So that's, as the first step, that's giving us visibility of how an environment is actually being used. But we can very quickly move on to the next step, which is the compliance. And that's very much to say, who owns these? Where do they live? Can I take ownership of them? Can I remove them because they're not being used? And that's a really important element to say, I can take ownership of something because it's been created by a user who has left. And so therefore I can take ownership of it and I can manage it and I can manage the connections. I can also, in that compliance element, apply the data loss prevention policies. So I can then start to lock down and say, actually, I don't want to have, my core environment being able to post to Twitter. I don't want that data being able to be pushed out of my organization. So therefore I can start to really get a grip on the environments and manage those to prevent any accidental loss of data going through those different environments. And
so the Center of Excellence is very much more for administrators to help govern the environment. It's not a kind of starter kit for people to create PowerApps.
It's not a starter kit for creating, but the third component is the nurture components.
Right. Okay.
And this is where you really get into, if you come along and you say, right, I'm going to create a flow, and it's the first flow that you've created, we can send you an email to say, welcome. We can see that you've created your first flow. We can then push you into a location where there are best practices, there are guidance, there is maybe add you to a team that says, this is where the makers team is, so you can actually get support and guidance. And this is where you can really start to encourage people to use the same things, using the same templates, starting from the same point, and working as a community of champions to share best practice. And that's where that third element is really, we've assessed what we've got, we've taken control of it, and now we're encouraging the usage and the best practice so that we've got more confidence that everybody is using it in a way that they're getting the most benefit out of it.
I think that's a really good point that you're making, Al, about you're trying to regain control. What about these organizations who have gone, no Power Platform, no Flow? There's not that data there because the governance has dictated there is nothing for you to use. Whereas we know that, part of building up a Power Platform community within an organization, it needs people to experiment. PowerApps are designed for people to help solve their own problems without the need of IT. But if IT are blocking that, they can't solve their own problems. They can't see the benefit of the tools. So there's there's definitely a conversation there, maybe a cultural changes in some places to say, where we would have had shadow IT in the past, access databases kind of propping up here and there, not knowing that was happening with the Power Platform, you're in control because it's in your environment, and you can use that to your advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned access databases. The other thing is Excel with macros. Both of those scenarios are what will drive IT to do exactly what you said and lock it down and go, actually, we're not going to allow anybody to do this because we don't want that cottage industry setting up where actually the server under someone's desk is running an access database that is business critical. Fred over in the corner has built so many macro based spreadsheets that the business is running on those, but nobody understands how to use them. That's the biggest driver for most IT departments. And as soon as Flow was released, the first thing that people asked was, how do I switch this off? That was the first thing that I got asked was, how do I stop users doing this? So being able to have that visibility of where these flows and PowerApps are being created is the first step in building confidence that actually there is control, there is visibility to say, this is how this is being used. The final step, the nurturing, this is being used correctly because there is guidance and there is a sharing of best practice. So yes, if an organization has not switched it on and is, really concerned and they haven't given the licenses, they've maybe removed the SKUs from everybody, the first thing to do to build their confidence is to put the center of excellence in so that they can see the usage and then demonstrate to them that as they start to roll those licenses out, they can see people creating things, they can actually have that visibility.
And I think this is where it fits nicely with what I was talking about before, is don't put in place policies that you can't enforce. In the world of telling people to do the right thing with macros, and everyone had it in their own shared drives, you just couldn't see where those macros were. There was no way of kind of easily getting a list of here's all our macros, here's all the vital ones, and bits like that. That is one thing I like about the Power Platform. That all your complex, awkward things that you have created, where you are, and you can at least view those. And what I love about this Centre of Excellence is you can start then categorizing that and automatically saying, look, we know this is an awkward Power Platform, we need to put the resource up front to get more knowledge going around it, to get more people to understand it, because this is critical, and you can start to build that categorization up easily rather than block it. You encourage people to do things the right way, and I think it's a way the world's moving a bit, and for the better.
It is, and so the Business Apps Wave 1 launch event had samples from GSK, for example, PowerApps that they've built. And I know, they've got a fantastic group of digital champions working within GSK to allow, and they have the autonomy to build things themselves. So therefore, being able to say to an organization, this is how you nurture your digital champions, your PowerApps champions. This is how you promote best practice and share that. That's where the Center of Excellence, it's a primer for that. It sets you up to be able to do that. You still need to put the effort in and go, this is what good looks like in our organization. But it's a great starting point.
Absolutely. And we probably should shout out to Manuela and the great work she's done.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Manuela's the absolute star of the whole Center of Excellence. And she's always happy to answer questions as well, which is fantastic.
You've just said that in public. You're going to get in trouble. It's going to be like, I will. Again.
Yes.
But no, I think it's a great tool, and I think it's having come from the SharePoint world and tried to define these things manually. And yes, there's been third-party but expensive tools. To have something that's open source and available that we can all contribute back to is fantastic.
And I mean, and just on that, the Center of Excellence is on GitHub. It's in PowerApps-tools under administration, but PowerApps-tools is a Microsoft repo that has not just the Center of Excellence, but it has all sorts of different things. It has components in there. It has all the labs for the app in a day, the admin in a day. It's a massive repository of some really, really useful information. So really worth having a look at to see what's in there. so that you can actually, if your organization isn't using PowerApps at the moment, that's the place to go to really find out, what you can actually start doing.
So the Centre of Excellence covers PowerApps and Flow and Power Automate.
Yes. Yes, it covers. Yes, you said Power Automate in there. Yes, you're trying to catch me out there. I see what you're trying to do.
It was honestly a genuine question that I was going to look up myself, and then thought, no, let's be honest and do it out.
It's PowerApps, and it's Flow. Business processes sit more within the dynamics space, the model-driven apps. They are in there. What it doesn't cover is the Power BI elements. That's still somewhat separated out, or virtual agents. Yeah, so some of these other elements that start to come through from as part of the Power Platform, I'm sure we will get information coming in, but at the moment it uses a lot of the audit logs in Office 365 to pull in, for nurture. It knows when you're starting a Power App, it knows when you're starting a Flow. Don't think that those audit logs yet have when you start a business process flow within a model-driven app. So some of the information won't be as granular in those areas.
And I know we were chatting, it's probably a month or 2 months ago, and you found a Power BI similar solution. Is that something you've gone further on, or?
No, I've not really pursued that.
Okay.
But that is,
we'll share that in the
it's more around guidance. We can share that in the notes. That's more around guidance and how you set up and use the out of the box Power BI reporting, because it's got its own stuff in the admin portal.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. And I think if we look, there's some great MVPs out there. Summit has done great work at Heathrow Airport. Those who don't know the story, I'll try and find a good video to share. But effectively, was a security guard at Heathrow and taught himself PowerApps, and has become such a beacon of that power user, that becoming part of it. And just a great story to hear. So I'm not going to dwell into it now, but we'll share that. But I think what's interesting was chat to him after I think it was the Ignite tour, and understanding where he went to becoming a developer, because he talked about a lot about not knowing a developer, not knowing about building requirements, not knowing about doing deployments. I think there is a great story around PowerApps, that all the things you can do as a good developer, you can actually do as part of the PowerApps and Flow story as well, and doing application lifecycle management, once you've remembered what that acronym stands for, which leads us neatly into Gary and the world of being a proper developer with the Power Platform.
Yeah, I guess
I knew that was going to get.
Is that a thing?
Oh, dear. Is it pro code or low code or no code?
It's
a little bit of code.
Right amount of code for the job that you're doing, I think.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Yes, yeah. I'll sit on the fence. So I mean, this is one of the key areas of kind of, for me, where the Power Platform has gone. It has been very much citizen developer led. Yes, you can build an app and it's easy to do so, but by making that easy, then there's also some trade-offs with that. You build an app and then you send that out to your organization. It gets really popular. You then need to keep making changes to it. You need to make updates. You need to ensure that those changes are going to go out and they're going to work. You're not going to break things. And how do you actually do that with the Power Platform? And it's not as easy as maybe it should be. And I think this is just generally the where the Power Platform is at the moment, but things are coming. So if you have this app, and like Al mentioned, you may have multiple environments. You may set that up to be dev, test, production. How do you actually move your application through those different stages? What is your process? We're talking about something that should be quick and easy to build, but you're starting to add in certain gates into your process to ensure that quality, to move it through these different processes. So, taking that app, making a change, validating that change works, and then being able to release that in a timely manner is something that I think is crucial to basically modern development as we know it. Everyone wants features and they want them now. They don't want things to be broken.
Yesterday, usually.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to have that confidence. So with the Power Platform, it's how do we ensure its operation when it's actually live. So we've got metrics. That's good. We keep it a center of excellence, gives us that kind of visibility. We know it's being used or not. But how do we test it? How do we validate that our changes are working, and try and speed that process up? And so at the moment, it's a very manual process of moving through different environments. You can export and import into different environments and validate them manually. So there's that option. But again, it's time consuming. If this is an app that you're doing as part of your job, which as a citizen developer, you're not, generally people aren't just doing this all day. It's adding extra time and extra things that you need to think about. So we've got things like the test studio now arriving into PowerApps. So this was an interesting, I think this was announced at Ignite a while ago. It was I think one slide that was mentioned. And for me, that was really interesting because it was highlighting that there was an issue there of how do we test things in a much better way. So the test studio is there to help you build these end-to-end tests so that you can rerun them. Every time you make a change, you can then rerun these automated tests and validate them. It's very early days. There's a lot of limitations around it. There's lots of things that it doesn't cover. So, you have to make the decision there of, well, you still have to do some manual validation of your changes.
It's worth saying if you are have come from the ALM world as a developer, I'm trying not to say a proper developer again. You can do things like use Selenium and other tools. It is a web-based system, so those web-based ones will work with it as well. So you could build into those. It's obviously a lot more effort involved in there, but those things can take place too, can't they?
And exactly, that's the trade-off, isn't it? You're going to the Power Platform to get all of these benefits, which are ease of use, ease of build, ease of release in some cases, to do something that's quite small. Potentially it could be just one screen, two screen, and just get that out and solve a business problem. As you start to scale that up and it becomes more of an application, then you're having to look at dev practices and try and apply them to now your Power App. And yes, you can use those different systems, but then you're going to have to get different potentially resources. You may have to go to IT to do that. It might not be actually relevant to a citizen developer.
I think this is there is a decision point in there to say at what point does it need to be tested and have that robustness. And for me, that's probably when it gets critical usage. You start to say, actually, this is really being used by a lot of people, or it's business critical. At that point, you then start to move it into, okay, it needs ALM, it needs to be robust, and it needs to be supported. You may very well also be moving it from, the play pit that everybody's in into a specific environment, at which point you may be starting to use your deployment processes to actually automatically test it and deploy it into different environments. And I think that's a key point where you kind of take ownership of it as a business critical process.
And that's where the COE can help with some evidence behind that as well, can't it? So you can look at the number of users who've used it and the number of distinct users. So you could, I wouldn't say that you make that the absolute hard and fast, when you hit these numbers, it must move to this. But that can be a flag to say, right, we should have a look at it. It's been used by 40, 50 users, and maybe even who those users are could trigger things. Starting to understand, right, at this point, this is vital. For example, if everyone in the service desk is using it, it may not be, may not have the number of usage, but if that goes down, then the service desk can't work. You've got a bigger problem. So
but it may the usage. The usage is a really good point, though, because as this application grows and your user base grows of your application, if you've come from a Dynamics background, maybe, or your organization is using Dynamics currently, chances are you're probably licensed for a lot of the things that people are going to use because you're using Dynamics and you've invested in that. If you're coming from the other side, however, you're then looking at PowerApps licenses, Power Automate licenses, maybe as individual apps or individual users, and dependent on how you're going to license that, as that application usage grows, the licensing cost in the background to be able to deliver that to your organization could skyrocket. It really could. So there's almost a decision there to say, okay, we're on a licensing model here with Power Platform, and we know that we've hit something. We've almost proved the concept that this is something that our business needs and it's delivering value. And then making a decision of cost of, okay, how do we actually manage the cost of this going forward? Does the cost of what, however, we're licensing at the moment, we might not have ambitions to go to Dynamics.
Hopefully not.
To get those extra licenses. So where do you go? Do you go, actually, we've proved our concept and this is really great. We could actually develop this as an application and run it in Azure. That gives the same level of functionality. Yes, it's then development, but you're like what you were saying now, it's come to a point where it's business critical, it's worth investing in. Do we need some IT backing and governance behind that? And that's a decision point, I think, as well.
Yeah, and I think it is. I mean, the technology that you use is one thing. I think the other thing that you highlighted there is, if it's business critical, what is the benefit to the organization? What is the cost saving to the organization of the tool that's being created? How much time is it actually saving? Because I know people say, Power Platform, yes, it's adding more licensing, and nobody likes to add more licenses. However, the other way to look at it is, I'm saving, a day a month for an employee. Well, how much does that actually cost? And is it, justified by that monthly cost for a license? In most cases, the answer is probably yes. But then the more you start using it and saying, well, actually, we've got multiple processes that maybe your service desk are pulling together in one location, in one application, actually the cost is clearly justified. And that starts to then go, well, actually, what could we maybe retire? Are there legacy applications that we can retire that actually will increase the justification? But I don't want to get into the analysis of costs and licensing for Power Platform, because I know that's a very prickly subject.
And there is no right answer to any of this. I think that's the important thing. What we've tried to raise today is the things to think about, the things to consider, whether you've got developers, whether you've got people who know Power Platform, whether you can test these things. All of these will factor in. It's not one organization. It's not one plan that we come up that fits every organization. It will very much be different for different organizations and different people. But hopefully what we've covered today is some of the tools, some of the services that are available, some of those ideas to think of, and to basically say that governance is not a bad thing. It's often used as a bad word, but it's enablement as well. It's making sure people have that nurture that you talked about, Al, as part of the COE. I think it's such an important point. It's not just stopping people, it's enabling people to do things better. So if there's a lesson from today, it's about enabling people to do better things. I think we'll wrap up there. We've gone over. I think I would also like to say a big thank you to our families who are looking after the kids at the moment. We are recording this at the weekend, who are helping us and allowing us to do this. And also a big thank you to everyone in the NHS and all those carers and key workers. A little bit of a cliche at the moment, but clap for our carers. I would like to do that and call out. Sorry to jump on that bandwagon, but I think it's an important one.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to raise just before we wrap up, we do have on our website, greyhatbeard.com, if you'd like to hear us talk about something, or if you would like to come and join us, please jump on there. There's a nice Microsoft form. We like to drink our own champagne and use the tools that we talk about. So If you'd like to come and join us, please fill out that form, or if you'd like to hear us talk about something, fill out the form there, and we would very much like to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you very much. We're going to go out and enjoy the sunshine just in our back garden, I hasten to add, and enjoy a bit of the weather. I've been Gray.
I've been Hat.
I've been Beard.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Grey Hat Beard Podcast. The song Drink Up My Mateys was brought to you by Black Bones under a non-commercial attribution license.